You need to know your past history.
My neighbor, same age as me, grew up here. He had never heard of Martinsville 7.
When you finally do hear about these things that happen here that you thought only took place in the Deep South, it's kind of overwhelming.
Learning about a slice of life that a lot of us have never experienced.
There are some conversations that need to take place in our community and in our nation.
Tonight, we're honoring Black history.
As we salute pioneers from the past, celebrate the present, and look forward to the future.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm John Carlin.
I'm Brittany McGraw. Our corner of the Commonwealth is full of Black history and culture. Tonight, we plan to highlight those who played a vital role in growing our communities and enriching the culture, not only here at home, but around the world.
Critics have long argued that 1 month dedicated to Black history is not enough, but it's also important to note why Black history is celebrated in February.
It was founded by historian, author, and Virginia native Carter G. Woodson in 1926 with the goal of educating more Black Americans about their heritage.
He originally came up with the idea as Negro History Week during the second week of February to correspond with the birthdays of well-known abolitionist Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, who was instrumental in helping abolish slavery in the United States.
Then in 1976, this celebration was expanded to include the entire month.
Prominent figures you may know here at home include Booker T. Washington, who was born into slavery in Franklin County and later became a serious voice for change. Then there's Oliver Whitehill, raised in Roanoke, who played a part in the Brown versus Board of Education case that overturned segregation in schools. And then there's Wendell Scott, a Danville native and NASCAR legend who inspired Black athletes throughout his career. All three of these men are honored through local historical markers.
Soon, a historical marker will be unveiled to honor and remember the lives of 7 men believed to be victims of an unjust criminal system. While today rape is mostly no longer punishable by death, in 1950 it was a capital offense. 7 men from Southwest Virginia were electrocuted for their alleged role in a rape. 10 News reporter McKinley Struther has the story of the Martinsville 7.
7 men, one story.
These men were executed because they were Black, and that's not right.
Now, you tell me where the justice is right there.
A story that sent shockwaves that are still reverberating more than 70 years later.
They were denied those guaranteed rights at every turn until they were ultimately killed in one of the largest mass executions carried out by any American court.
The Martinsville 7.
Francis DeSales Grayson, Frank Hairston Jr., Howard Hairston, James Luther Hairston, Joe Henry Hampton, Booker T. Miller, and John Claiborne Taylor.
January 8th, 1949. 32-year-old Ruby Stroud Floyd was said to be in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Martinsville, Virginia, to collect money for clothes she sold. A little more than 2 years later, in February of 1951, 7 Black men were electrocuted for her rape in the largest group execution for a single victim crime in Virginia's history.
I don't know what happened that fateful night in Cherrytown in Martinsville, Virginia.
In the time that has passed, doubt has been raised over whether these men committed the crime. More doubt has been raised over whether they were even given a fair trial with accusations of coercion.
To us, it's one particular wound that continues to mar Virginia's history.
From 1908, when record-keeping began, until at least the early 50s, all 45 individuals executed for rape in Virginia were Black men. The Martinsville 7 were convicted and sentenced to death within 8 days, while all white jurors, 2 were tried at the same time.
How can you have 2 men that's going to be executed, tried at the same trial? It did not make any, that's not justice.
Pamela Harrison is a blood relative of the Harrison boys.
Let me know my history before you ask me to get over it.
Their story is one many don't know, and it is her mission to change that.
Today, I'm giving each one of the 7 a posthumous pardon.
August 31st, 2021.
Oh, and when James Grayson started crying beside me and started speaking in tongues.
Former Virginia Governor Ralph Northam issues a posthumous pardon for the 7.
Race has played such a pivotal role in how our systems are structured today.
Some stories have happy endings. This one does not. Yes, they were pardoned. Yes, more attention is now on their story. But there is still someone who says they were a victim of rape. 7 men who were victims of an unjust criminal system and 7 decades of unhealed pain for their families.
2 other notable figures in local civil rights history are also being recognized. There will soon be a marker in Botetourt County for Olympic boxer and pioneer Norval Lee. The Eagle Rock native was arrested in 1948 in Covington for refusing to leave the whites-only section of a train car. His conviction was later reversed.
A roadside marker was recently unveiled for Samuel F. Kelso, one of Lynchburg's first African-American teachers. Kelso was also a delegate for the National Convention of the Colored Men of America. As a formerly enslaved person, he advocated for equity in education.
A black woman from Roanoke, known as the mother of modern medicine, played a pivotal role in American history. But despite her contributions, it's a name many don't recognize. Roanoke native Henrietta Lacks died of cervical cancer at the young age of 31. It was the 1950s, and polio disabled tens of thousands of people every year in the United States. Though Lacks had no known history with polio, her cells were remarkable and would lead to a polio vaccine.
They also discovered that her cells were immortal. They did not die.
With Lacks' unique cells, researchers could study how the virus infected humans.
So I worked in polio eradication, and I have seen firsthand how her cells have helped eradicate a disease that was so horrible. It started a whole new phase in medicine, which was investigate, able to create vaccines, able to address cancer.
Medical researchers, seeing the value, kept her cells reproducing. Today, they're called HeLa cells, and they serve to help find cures to many, many diseases. But there's a problem.
Today, those cells support a multi-billion-dollar biotechnology industry.
Her cells were harvested and propagated, but nobody ever asked the family for permission. They would not find out for another 25 years. Long after medical science had been profiting from the use of her cells, eventually leading to the evolution of bioethics and informed consent.
Henrietta obviously had a lot of people.
In 2021, Roanoke City Council renamed Lee Plaza downtown Henrietta Lacks Plaza, and there are efforts afoot to raise $140,000 for a bronze statue.
This person has contributed to the entire world, and she's a native of Roanoke. So I think that's an amazing story, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Perhaps when that happens, Roanokers will really begin to realize the contribution this Star City native made so many years ago.
A piece of history that's more than 100 years old is paying homage to a critical figure to the Pulaski community. While cleaning, volunteers at the T.G. Howard Center found the diploma of its namesake, which dates back to 1906.
We were just in shock because, one, it was in fantastic condition. We're not even aware if anyone even knew that this existed because the building itself had been probably shut down and closed for over 12 years.
The diploma was put in a new frame to keep it safe. They plan to put it on display temporarily at the Christiansburg Institute.
The Black experience in Southwest Virginia and across the country has involved a continued push for social justice and equal rights.
We are on the battlefield.
I don't think that the fight is over until we're able to sit back and breathe.
When our salute to Black history continues, hear the conversation between generations on what it will take to create equality for all. The images you see here show the battle for equality and justice has been an ongoing push here in Southwest Virginia. On the left, a peaceful march in 1965 in honor of the Reverend James Reeb, who was killed during a demonstration for civil rights in Selma, Alabama. And on the right, demonstrations in downtown Roanoke following the death of George Floyd in 2020. People of all generations continue to push for change, which is why we brought together members of the Roanoke branch of the NAACP to discuss the fight for civil rights yesterday, today, and into the future.
I kind of think about my youth, my years in the 60s, where we were fighting for equality and for voter rights. And do you think that things have changed any since that time? It appears to me that we're going back to certain periods of time that they want us to be like in Jim Crow time.
I would never want to see us to go backwards. Do I think that there are some things that we are, turning the page backwards on? Definitely. But do I think that we are equipped with continuing to move forward? Yes.
It is a fight. We talk, the NAACP is very instrumental in training our youth how to speak out and be advocates for justice.
Why do you think it's so important to have young people involved in the push for equality and rights?
Well, it's important because they need to be involved in the process because it's a learning process, and you need to know your past history, you need to know a lot in order to facilitate the growth. So I think that my role as an administrator and a advisor is to help you to understand how to navigate the roles of life and to be involved in the fight because you are the future. So I think it's important that you know what you're fighting for and why. And Roanoke youth have done a good job of learning how to speak up and speak out.
So alongside these youth, what would you say is your motivation for creating such a difference and acting towards that change and peace?
My motivation is my love for community and youth and children. I'm hopeful that our young people will go forth and be a part of the movement.
To know that there are people who felt so strongly about the things that they were fighting for so that the change could be made and that their kids and their grandkids and their great-grandkids could be affected in a beneficial way because of the work that they put in, I think is very honorable, and I'm appreciative of the work that was put in before me.
What do you think that our young people can continue to do to fight injustice?
My hope for the fight that we have, it's always there, and I feel like if you don't have that hope for an end goal, that's when you start to get complacent, and I know that I don't think I could ever be complacent. I do think that we are still vastly affected by the things that you were affected by as a youth and the people that came before you. But I'm glad to know that there are still people like me and you out there to continue to fight because I don't think that the fight is over until we're able to sit back and breathe.
You can watch the full conversation right now on WSLS.com.
You don't always know necessarily how you're going to be received.
Accomplishments that will inspire future generations.
I was the first, as I know.
We'll share some hidden figures who are currently shaping Black history in Virginia. We want to take a moment tonight to also recognize those who are currently breaking boundaries in honor of Black History Month. That includes Virginia Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, who is not only the first woman, but also the first woman of color to take on the role. Closer to home, Bill Brown was the first Black officer in the New River Valley. He joined the force in Blacksburg during the Civil Rights era and climbed the ranks all the way to the top when he was promoted to chief in the mid-90s. He served for decades until his retirement in 2006. The new police station, the William H. Brown Building, is being named in his honor. The leader of the Virginia Military Institute is also a champion of change. Major General Cedric Wins is the military school's first ever Black superintendent. He took over the role after allegations into racism that sparked a state-ordered investigation.
There are some hidden figures hiding right in our own backyards. In the 70s, St. Patrick Wright became the first Black man to own a refrigeration business in Roanoke. He later became the first Black man to teach the trade at Virginia Western and later the VA. The military veteran's work as a technician for more than 3 decades and him being an overall handyman, he believes is what helped build and keep the Roanoke Black community afloat.
You have to more or less prove to people that you're good enough to maintain your status in life.
Mr. Wright wore many hats as a veteran, business owner, father, and husband. Two brothers are bringing a new style of coffee to Southwest Virginia. Stefan and Quincy Randolph opened Roasters Next Door, also known as R&D Coffee, in Wasena 4 years ago, and now it has grown with a second location in Vinton.
I think being a black-owned business, sometimes you have a concern that, you know, you won't get the full support of the community. And fortunately, I feel very fortunate that people have really come out and made a point to support us.
Their product became so popular that they started offering wholesale coffee to grocery stores.
From art exhibits, walking tours, museums, and historic sites.
The local spots that celebrate the contributions of African Americans next. This March will mark 60 years since Martin Luther King Jr. visited Lynchburg, and organizations are looking for new ways to honor the contributions of African Americans. They want more historical markers, artwork, and statues throughout the Hill City, including 5th Street, which was once a hub for black-owned businesses. Two Lynchburg museums are teaming up for a first-of-its-kind project on the history of slavery. Courtney Lockey explains how they hope this will bring in new perspectives.
The Legacy Museum of African American History and the Lynchburg Museum System are working together to share the history of slavery in the Hill City.
If we're going to honor it, if we're going to own it, if we're going to live it, we need to start at grassroots.
The Silent Witnesses Project strives to make history of enslavement seen in the city with historical markers, events, and artifacts.
I was thrilled because it felt like finally somebody is looking into who these people were, how they survived.
The museum also hopes to share new research and understandings in local school curriculum and through guided walking tours.
There's a gap in local history and what we know about this topic, and so much has been uncovered and learned in the past 5, 10, 20 years.
The first documented slaves were brought to Central Virginia in the late 1730s. By 1860, Lynchburg became a major site for buying and selling people.
They were not seen as human beings, they were seen as chattel. And that's why it's so difficult when you go back.
The project won't be unveiled until Juneteenth 2023, but they need your help. The museums are asking for pictures, documents, artifacts, and stories that show the history of slavery in the area.
There are some conversations that need to take place in our community and in our nation, and I think that this is the time and period to do that.
If you're in Southside, the Danville Museum of Fine Arts and History is now on the National Civil Rights Trail. That designation was announced earlier this month, and these are just some of the exhibits you'll find inside. But as Duke Carter shows us, there are several spots in the city where activists fought for change.
Inside Danville Museum of Fine Arts and History, a dozen people are taking a moment to reflect. Most are admiring the contributions of Camilla Williams, an opera singer from Danville who became a national treasure.
I really enjoyed it. It was educational to me.
Educational because some guests of the first trolley tour learned about historic neighborhoods where blacks lived and shopped in the River City.
Learning about a slice of life that a lot of us have never experienced. We grew up, you know, since these things happened.
They didn't turn around. The water from the fire hose.
Tour guide Carice Luckbremer, in addition, showed the group several landmarks in the city.
We have 22 markers in the city. 9 of those markers, they represent African American history and culture.
Which includes one that holds a significant part of American history. Now, this marker near Danville City Hall highlights Bloody Monday. Now, during the Civil Rights Movement, African-American ministers were fighting for equal rights. And in June of 1963, police clubbed and hosed marchers, injuring nearly 4 dozen and arresting 60. Now, Dr. King heard of what happened in Danville and offered his support for the ministers. He led a nonviolent march in the streets in July, which later gained national coverage before the March on Washington in August.
You know, so when you finally do hear about these things that happen here that you thought only took place in the Deep South, it's kind of overwhelming.
Because Danville has its place in American history.
It brought back memories in terms of when I was a student, as well as when we talked to our grandparents in places that we have heard of, and it familiarized us and made us appreciate more.
and celebrate African American contributions.
Black history also runs deep in the Star City, once under segregation. The Gainsborough community was where Black people lived, went to school, church, and opened businesses. As the neighborhood looks to the future, it remembers the past through a walking tour. In addition to the Harrison Museum of African American Culture, hit films with rich Black history come to life at the Taubman Museum of Art. The Afrofuturism display is a way of reimagining a future of arts, science, and technology as seen through a Black cultural lens. The exhibit features more than 60 costumes from generation-defining movies like Black Panther, Do the Right Thing, and Malcolm X. It's open until April 3rd. Over the last half hour, we've shared past and present stories of Black history from across Southwest and Central Virginia. Now, we want to reflect on what Black History Month means in your house.
Did you talk about it growing up? Did you attend events? Do you maybe remember learning about it in school? We want to hear your experiences.
If you'd like to take a minute tonight to share, head to our website, WSLS.com. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great night.